Every year, API or AAPI Heritage Month is celebrated throughout the month of May. And every year, PI or Pacific Island voices are minimized or completely left out. This year, we're spotlighting and uplifting the work of some amazing Indigenous Pasifika women, starting with women from the Micronesian region. That area, there, in the upper left of Pasifika. Though the smallest and most often minimized and or completely forgotten region, Micronesia is also the home to some of Pacifica's most awe-inspiring women. But first, a brief history on the Micronesian region. Okay, in 1889, the Spanish government lost the Philippines and Guam thanks to a peace treaty following the Spanish-American War. They then sold their remaining possessions in the Pacific, which was the Caroline and Mariana Islands, to Germany. When World War I broke out, Germany already had a pretty vast empire in the Pacific. It had the western half of Samoa, the northern half of the Solomon Islands, Nauru, and Micronesia, which consisted of the Mariana, Caroline, and Marshall Islands. And like a real-life game of Risk, they really only acquired their Pacific holdings to show the reach of the great and mighty German Empire. But to be honest, Micronesia had little to no economic value to them. Actually, if anything, their Pacific colonies were probably more of a liability due to the physical distance. And let's face it, it's not like they really had a great deal of concern for indigenous populations at the time. After World War I, Australia was awarded the former German New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, Nauru, and the northern half of the Solomon Islands. Meanwhile, German Samoa became a New Zealand mandate. Meanwhile, the League of Nations issued the South Pacific Mandate to the Empire of Japan, the South Pacific Mandate, Caroline, Mariana, and Marshall Islands. Japan governed them under the mandate as part of the Japanese colonial empire until World War II. World War II essentially got underway in the Pacific theater December 1941 when Pearl Harbor was bombed. That same time, the Japanese also bombed the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, Malaysia, Thailand, Shanghai, and Midway, or not bombed, but attacked. So from November 1943 to October 1944, the United States proceeded to invade, capture, rescue, depending on your take, the islands under the South Pacific Mandate. After 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan surrendered to General MacArthur. The formal surrender took place September 1945, and on October 24th, 1945, the United Nations was born. So in addition to maintaining peace and security, other UN objectives include developing friendly relations among countries based on their respect for principles of equal rights and self-determination of people, achieving worldwide cooperation to solve international economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems, and respecting and promoting human rights. The Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands came into existence July 18th, 1947, and it was designated as a strategic area, meaning that unlike other trust territories, this trust territory could only be terminated by the Security Council rather than the General Assembly. So the US Navy controlled TTPI from Guam until 1951, when the Department of the Interior took over and then administered the territory from a base in Saipan. On October 21st, 1986, the US ended its administration of the Marshall Islands. Chuuk, Yap, Koshrai, and the Mariana Islands followed November 3rd, 1986. But the Security Council didn't formally end trusteeship for them until December 22nd, 1990. The Security Council ended trusteeship for Palau May 25th, 1994, and Palau reestablished their independence on October 1st that same year. All of this is to say that in less than 100 years, the region was passed from Spain to Germany to Japan and finally to the United States. And yes, colonization will wreak havoc on indigenous communities, no matter who is the occupier or how long they've been there. But despite all of this, the region has managed to retain their cultures, customs, and languages. And even as the region continues to struggle with ongoing militarization and Western imperialism, the foremothers and their wisdom remain, as you will see with our two guests on this Indigenous Pasifika episode of Indigenous Feminisms.
My name is Singeo, and I'm from Palau. I work as an executive director to Ebiil Society. It's a local nonprofit organization that has been around since 2005. I'm one of the co-founders of the organization. And we started the organization really focusing on environmental education program for children and young people. Um, and then now today we actually have a training center with dorms and facilities for researchers and students to live with us and learn. We can hold up to 60 students at a time. We are now hosting not just the local youth and schools, but we also host universities around the world who come to live with us and learn from the local scientists and the elders in our communities. So the way that we teach is we team teach. So we always have a science teacher or trainer and an indigenous knowledge holder that complements the science classes. We have developed our own curriculum for the center, and the curriculum is such that it embodies current science and the indigenous knowledge of Palau.
Tiro, Guahusi Moñeka Dioro. I am Chamorro from the Mariana Islands in the middle of the Pacific. I am specifically from the island of Guahan or Guam, which is one of the longest held territories in the world. And we have been under United States occupation since 1898. I work with Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. And at MCCA, we really are focused on cultivating community-based solutions to the climate crisis and building regional cohesion throughout the frontline communities of Micronesia. We focus a lot on food security and food sovereignty, youth empowerment, energy democracy, indigenous rights, women's rights, and waste reduction on our islands, and a whole host of other partnerships and creating educational and digital storytelling so that our community is more aware of all these different issues and how they intersect with climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, and all the justices that are all linked together for the climate crisis, because all of the systems of oppression and systems of harm are the same systems that have created the climate crisis. So introducing that sort of intersectional lens to our community and educating them on different pathways forward, such as the just transition and the Thrive Agenda, are all things that we like to do at Micronesia Climate Change Alliance and put into action.
Do I consider myself a feminist? I have actually never referred to myself as a feminist, but the the work that I do actually supports the work of feminists. So I guess I am. I guess technically I am. I just never knew that I was. Um, but I can say that I was one of the first women who came out to advocate for women in decision making bodies in the National Congress (OEK), um, and And a lot of the work that I have been doing has been revolving around empowering women and girls, not in a sense where, in a lot of cases where the inequality in decision making or authority is not equitable between men and women in other cultures, because in Palau, women actually have an upper hand in the traditional sense of decision making. But I think that the challenges that we face today in the workplace and in opportunities for schools or education or jobs make it difficult for women to participate equally. So those are some of the things that I have consistently been working around, and at any time, whenever I can, I would include those in the work that we're doing. So right now um, we have part of the classes that we teach. We've moved from just teaching environmental studies. We're now teaching young high schoolers and college students in Palau to become researchers of their own knowledge, of Palau's knowledge. So we have a class that we're teaching, and it's a partnership with Stanford University, where we teach decolonizing research, which is really meant to empower local young people to become researchers of their own language, of their own words, of their own tradition, to learn from their own elders, and to make decisions with the results of those research that they do. Um, and one of the things that we do in integrate into the teaching and learning is gender balance, decision making, and participation in leadership. So we figured if we start them early on, then we can at least know that by the time they're making decisions, adults, that they actually have those terms to reference and they have sensitivity to gender equity.
Chamorro women on Guam and in the Marianas and throughout Micronesia, women in general are very empowered. I think by nature, we come from matrilineal societies. I have 5 sisters, or there's 5 of us all together. And my grandmother also, both of my grandmothers had lots of sisters, and they really were the ones that were running our homes, making decisions. Everybody's house is the auntie's house or the nana's house. You're not going to Tata's house or the uncle's house. It's the woman. He always refers to the household as the woman's home. And women have been very empowered, both politically and even within religious structures. Women have created, through the Catholic Church, their own roles as prayer leaders and their own roles as organizers throughout our long colonial experience. So in many ways, women have adapted through colonization, but have always maintained a sense of power as organizers within our community. So feminism, I think, is inherent to us as women, as chamaritas, as Chamorro women. It's inherent, it's in our blood to be able to care for our communities, to be able to cooperate and problem solve with one another. So in that sense, I am a feminist, but I definitely don't recognize that off the bat. It's something that I have to figure out in my own cultural lens if feminism matches with me, and it does inherently. It's just not so much in the, I guess, cis white experience, but definitely women are very empowered in my community. We also have our first female governor for Guam, and just 2 years ago we had a supermajority of women in our unicameral legislature, so which we called the Ladyslature, and it was really a great time. It's really been a great time in Guam and also in the CNMI. They've just elected in this last 2020 election the most amount of women in their legislature too. So it's been really great for women here in the political sphere and also in all sorts of professional spheres to see women rising and women really taking leadership roles for our islands across the board, from the judicial side to the business side to all roles in the government. So it's really great to be a woman in our islands right now.
What role do women play in environmental protection? That's actually everything. Women just, that is our nature. It is our nature, the caring capacity, the caring for communities and families. That's what women do. That's our nature, and so that's probably why a lot of, if you look at the environmental environmental protection community in Palau, there's more women than there are men. And I just think that that is part of our DNA, to care for social welfare, social good. And so at the same time, a lot of the social entrepreneurs of Palau are actually women. They've learned to take what they care for, what they care about, and turn it into an entrepreneur, a business operation that benefits people in small communities, people in wider social network. And I guess I am one of those women who are social entrepreneur, and I think that's what we do. We're always thinking of how can I do something that actually benefits more people around me. And so a lot of the work that we do revolves around women as caretakers of the planet. So, for instance, our forest restoration work here in Palau began with women in our small communities, and it has expanded nationwide, and is now being the solutions that were sorry, the solutions that were created by the women and adapted from their indigenous farming technologies are now introduced into the global community. So the project has won awards in the international lens, as well as national, and have become technologies that is adapted for the science community. So the U.S. Forest Service is now including the solutions that were introduced by the Palauan women into their list of technologies for land restoration. And right now, the most current project that we're doing right now is with women fishers. Now, Palau's women fishery is an old tradition that has been passed on for generations. Women fish in the mangrove all the way to through the seagrass, where we collect sea cucumber and clams. But because in the patriarch society, fisheries is always associated with men, a lot of the development programs and support has bypassed women and made the assumption that fisheries is a topic that is to be discussed by men fishers, without inclusion of women. And as a cost, we've lost so much of those habitat, the seagrass habitat, to pollution, to overharvesting, overuse. And so there's almost some sort of a serial depletion that's happened in Palau, where very few of our marine resource habitat where sea cucumber is often harvested, very few of them are actually still healthy and can be depended on. Most of them, majority of them, are just devastated to the point where they're unsustainable. And so the effort that we are putting into this project right now is to try and restore women's fisheries through hatchery programs where we spawn and grow seedlings of alet or sea cucumbers and clams and reseed the wild with women in the small communities. Um, and that's the goal. The main goal is to increase the wild stock, and that should in turn improve the livelihood of women who depend on their fishery for livelihood. 73% of our informal market is dominated by women, and women are the ones who depend on their sales at the market as primary source of income. And so when this habitat are devastated and lost, families suffer because women they will take what they make from the market and use it to support their families. And so the loss of such habitat would mean loss to such an important women culture in Palau, and displace women and girls in our society.
Yeah, women have a huge role in protecting the environment, from professionals, consultant work, being biologists in the field, to being the policymakers, to being the activists who are really wanting and advocating for demilitarization of our islands. Women are at the forefront of making sure that we are protecting our resources for future generations. We have this one beautiful legend that we often refer to and draw strength from, where the women came together because the women came together to catch this big monster that was eating at our islands. And the men tried all the ways they can to catch this big fish. It was from the ocean. It came from the depths of the ocean. And the women came together. They sacrificed their beautiful long hair and they wove this magical net. And the women caught that fish, which was basically eating the island at both sides, and almost going to split our island in half. And this legend gives insight into why Guam is very skinny at the center. And the women were able to save our island by sacrificing their beauty, sacrificing their hair, weaving a net together, cooperating and catching this fish. And we draw strength from that today when we're looking at things like waste reduction or demilitarization or decolonization, as women really being the ones who come together, who rally our community, and are the ones who really just work it out and protect our communities and protect our environment so that we have something that is so sacred shared to the next generation. And it's so true when it comes to environmental protection to this day.
I don't have a specific reference to the United States. I think it's more of the big economies of the world, and I think the injustice is that even at the negotiating table where we're deciding who's going to take responsibility for what with regards to climate change, the the design of the approach, the design of the solution is that the big countries who are contributing to the depletion of our ozone layer will pay by giving the money to drive solutions for climate change. And to me, that is just a continuation of the same problem, because that does not solve the problem. That's just buying your way through, and putting money in vulnerable communities, that further makes them more vulnerable, because now they're to voice out their concerns about those things complicates their relationship with the donor countries. And so, just at that very foundation to the climate change, desire to make a difference, it's not going to work if that is the design. You know, if you're going to take responsibility for, if you're going to take responsibility for what you do, you got to own it, and you got to change what you're doing. But money is not going to make it go away. And unfortunately, it is us in the small community, especially communities who live so closely with the ocean, that feel the brunt of the problems associated with climate change. And it's not even by choice. That's just how it is. When you live next to, when you live so closely connected with nature, it is a reciprocal relationship, not just on the basis of the giving and the taking, but it also reflects on the health of the people. And so when the ocean is sick, people are sick. When the planet is sick, people are sick. And if you're a person who lives so closely connected to nature, you're going to feel those, and it's going to affect your overall health. So it's not just an issue of, say, sea level rise or temperature. It's about human health and human lives. And unfortunately, we get to pay for those mistakes. Yeah, I think, it was also the decisions that were made that were, with regards to what are we going to do as a global community. There's such an early time in our understanding of what that means, that we were just kind of happy to say that someone is going to pay for the work that needs to be done. And we overlooked the fact that that doesn't change the behavior of the contributors to the depletion of ozone layer. So, but I think right now the next one is coming up soon, and I think those are places where Indigenous communities should organize themselves and go there and make their voices heard.
So part of the work that brought me to climate justice is a decade-long struggle for the islands of the Marianas and to protect our lands from hyper-military expansion. And our islands have long been touted as the tip of the spear, as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, as a refueling station, and have really only been looked at and treated as a colonial outpost. And most of these actions take place without the prior and informed consent of the Indigenous people. And the military's toxic legacy is something felt so strongly here on Guam and throughout the Marianas, because we have such high rates of cancer. Guam has experienced invasive species associated with the military, the brown tree snake, which has decimated our native bird populations. And there's just so many examples, like over 100 Superfund toxic sites just on Guam alone. And we're only a 30-mile long island, only 212 square miles, such a small space to have so much toxicity. And it's the same in Tinian. And Tinian was a place where the nuclear bombs that were dropped on, or the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were staged at. And there's still many unexploded ordinances found throughout the islands. And Right now, there's moves to make the Marianas and parts of Micronesia the largest training complex. Billions of dollars are being poured into our islands right now, destroying native forest, over 900 football fields of pristine limestone forest, which were some of the last on Guam, have been destroyed in the last few months to create a fire range complex for a new U.S. Marine base. And these Marines are being moved after decades of resistance from Okinawa to Guam. And there's also plans to extend training ranges in both the islands of Tinian and in the very pristine island of Pagan in the Northern Marianas. And it's devastating to think that our children are more likely going to inherit toxic military sites than they are pristine limestone jungles and coral reefs that are teeming with life, the ways that we've been able to inherit most of our lands and waters. And these also, it includes a lot of our airspace too. And there's also suggestions to build more military installations in the islands of the Federated States of Micronesia, like Yap, and as well as in the Republic of Palau, which is so disheartening to hear some of our leaders in the islands suggesting these sorts of moves, because if Guam's an example, or if islands like Hawaii or Kuhulave and Hawaii are examples, there's so much destruction and devastation that occurs with military action. And our lands are so sacred to us. Their lands are so small out here in the Pacific, and they're all we really have aside from this great ocean that connects us all. But it's so important to defund the Department of Defense, and to, especially during the climate crisis, especially given that the US military is the single largest consumer of fossil fuels, is the single largest protector of the fossil fuel industry, and is the single largest polluter in the world. We really have to be, as climate justice leaders and as activists, really pushing to decarbonize our entire planet and really put pressure on the United States to instead take the billions and trillions of dollars that go into war and weapons manufacturing and war proliferation to go into empowering the solutions from the front lines and empowering women to take leadership roles to heal from all this harm of hundreds of years of dominance and hundreds of years of patriarchy. We really need to start doing the deep healings that deal with the root of the system of the climate crisis, which is patriarchy and capitalism and colonization and this industry of death that our islands have been so attached to with the US proliferation of war is something that I'm so tired of being a sacrifice zone for our islands, not only in our lands and our waters, but our bodies as well. People in the Pacific from our islands have the highest enlistment rate, and we die at a rate much higher than those in the US states. And we don't even have a say in the right to vote for president. And there's so many ways in which they say that Guam and the Marianas is where America's day begins, but it really is where democracy ends, because we haven't had our inherent right of self-determination enacted and protected, especially for those in Guam. And we haven't had an opportunity after 500 years of colonization to express our political will and want and desires for a future. And that's something that I hope to continue to advocate for. And I'm so grateful for the community here on Guam that are really pushing, the generations and generations of people who have been fighting for decolonization and for self-determination for our islands, especially in light of all of the devastation and desecration done by the US military on our environment and our culture.
We have a website. It's ebiilsociety.org, or Ebiil society.org. And that website is updated regularly. So if one wanted to find out more about the work that we're doing, you can go to our website. And then, of course, if you have further questions, there's ways to contact us, and it's all at the website, so you can connect with us and have we can have conversations.
There's so many ways to support the work that I do and the work of the people in the Marianas who are protecting our environment. I work at Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. You can find us at Micronesia Climate Alliance on all our social medias, or MCCA Guam on Twitter. There's also a really important organization, two important organizations working on demilitarization throughout the Marianas. On Guam, it's called Putehi Latexan, and Latexan is a really important ancestral site, which is now a wildlife refuge and is going to become the surface danger zone to that fire range complex in northern Guam, right above our aquifer. So our main source of drinking water is under major threat right now because of U.S. military action. And there's another organization called Our Commonwealth 670, and they are mostly women-led and mostly Indigenous, and they are ensuring that our communities are informed and united in ensuring that the islands of Tinian, Pagan, and even parts of Saipan are protected against U.S. military, and ensuring that land rights are kept safe in the process as well. And I think if you check us out on YouTube, on Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, we've done a lot of different things to show climate solutions and really empower our communities to support these solutions on the ground here. And we're also a part of so many wonderful networks. And any of those networks, such as Global Grassroots Justice or Climate Justice Alliance or the It Takes Roots Alliance or Power Shift Network or Heirs to Our Ocean, there's so many wonderful people that we work with in the States and beyond to really advance our efforts here and to inform us on the beautiful ways to move forward together and united. And just want to thank you, all those at IAN, for this opportunity to share from the Pacific Islands ways in which feminism and in which climate justice is being realized here. This is Uswasi.
I think what I've learned over time doing this kind of work is the importance of communities knowing who they are, knowing what they have, and understanding what their environmental challenges are and how they got there. Because a lot of times we kind of look outside for solutions or even try to kind of put a blame on somebody. And when you do that, then you remove yourself from that responsibility of taking care of what is yours, your own home. We know the solutions to our problems. What's happening around us in terms of climate change is real, but it is only exacerbated by the types of degradation that we are imposing on our land and on our ocean at home. And if we understood those things better, then we would know what we need to do. Because yes, there are certain things that we don't have any control on, like the sea level rise. But we can better prepare for sea level rise if our natural surrounding is healthy and intact. A good example is some of the work that we're doing right now is restoring coastal communities, just simply planting trees around those areas, putting coconut trees and coastal plants back in their place where they used to be, that have been removed. And so, because we adapted to this new sense of um, um, caste economy, where we feel like everything that we do is about getting more tourists to land in Palau to have a better enjoyment of our beach and our view. But in that process, we have managed to destroy some of the most important natural protection that we have against the massive storms, typhoons, sea level rise. And if we can actually just take take a moment and reflect on those things, look at the photos of the islands before and now, and you will see that it's no longer green. The trees are gone, the coconut trees are gone. And that's what protected us from a lot of these natural disasters. If we can learn from that and understand that our resilience does not depend on how much money we can fundraise from outside donors or how much grants we can bring into this country, but our own resilience really depends on us being able to help ourselves and restoring our natural environment that to the way that it was meant to be. And if we can learn to do those things based on our own means, then we become resilient communities again. Because it is not beyond us. We have lived for thousands of years in the small island communities, being self-reliant. And so to do those things again and to look at ourselves, look within, is just an option. It's an option that we have in front of us.